Hello, welcome to today's stream or video, which will be a quick one, but I just wanted to briefly talk about a little fun mini escapade I had to do, which ties into Caesars, the public company, um, you know, opportunity cost, marginal utility, and many more academic behavioral finance terms that I could just name drop for perpetuity. But to summarize, so Caesars Sportsbook, or again, we're speaking for the what happened to a friend. Um, the friend got a promotion from Caesars, not what is shown on screen, but roughly speaking, right? Uh, with a bet $5, get $50 in bonus bets promotion, which and the bonus bets are paid out in five increments of 10. So you can take on five separate idiosyncratic bets. Assuming, of course, you do straights. I'm not sure why you would want to do a parlay given the inherently embedded risk uh, that you're taking on, right? The difference between independent events versus dependent events. I don't. It's not the most fun to be on the losing side of that, unless of course you're just a shareholder of the sports books, in which case you love to take rate on parlays and whatnot, or ACCAs as they're called. But so the promotion was for bet five, get 10 or get 50, but of course, this promotion was in a specific state, which is not the state the friend was currently in. So you have to go to that state, and so it's not as easy as simply just opening up your laptop, open up your betting Excel, and just checking and just making the promotion right. Like no, you actually have to go drive X. And in this case, for the friend, it was a decent chunk of time. Right, it's like a bit over an hour, like 61 miles, had to fill up on gas to go get to go into the certain state, right? Because of course, sports betting, as part of its legalization, is a state's issue or a state's jurisdiction, not federal, which means every state has its own mishmash of regulatory and licenses, which ultimately creates the potential consumer surplus to be able to, especially if you live in a state that's next to other states, you can conceivably right bounce to another state. Like I imagine if you live in New England. Now, of course, New England, right, not as much population, so the amount of sports books that'd be interested in that area, and certainly to a degree, that'd be super generous with their offers, isn't super high. Let me pull something up. For example, the U.S. Gaming Association has a pretty nice interactive map. Of course, it's from the literal American Gaming Association, so take it as you will. But it does have a pretty nice map of just sports betting. I suppose we'll make this slightly bit longer video and just talk about the sports betting landscape in general, just because it's interesting as a consumer. Maybe maybe it will affect where you want to move, or for a job search. Like maybe California's marginal attractiveness declines, knowing that it's likely not going to be legalized in California for at least a decade. Though it would be pretty funny for someone where that's the red line to not want to live in California versus job prospects or not liking the weather or whatever else. Biggest conception, right? Like it would be interesting though, right? If every state did legalize, right? Because if you're in the middle of Texas or if you're in like San Francisco, California, it's probably a bit cumbersome to go to Oregon, Nevada, Arizona to try to arbitrage some bets. Whereas if you live in like Massachusetts, New England, right? You got these. Um, Say you live in bottom West Virginia, Indiana, Great Lakes area, right? Like you can conceivably arbitrage a decent amount. Of course, if we actually look at sports books that are available in those sites, right? Like Vermont only has three sports books, right? Because Vermont is not that big of a market, not that attractive of a market, evidently. But if we look at New York, which I believe is currently the biggest betting market, look how many operators there are. Right, you have 8 operators in New York. Of course, New York, very high cost structure. So let's look at another state, Pennsylvania, also a pretty big state. Right, 12 sports books in Pennsylvania. New Jersey, I think, has the most. Right, and look at New Jersey, right? 3, 6, 7, 15, 16, or 15, 16 sports books, right? You have weird idiosyncrasies, right? Like you have the legal monopoly in Florida with the Hard Rock Indian Reservation collaboration, right? So conceptually, right? But again, you notice how the books that are in Maryland aren't necessarily the books that are in Pennsylvania, and not and for even if say let's say BetMGM, right? The Entain and MGM partnership, a joint venture, JV, is in both states, but it might have a different wallet. So your $10 in let's say Pennsylvania doesn't carry over to your New Jersey BetMGM account. So you have two separate balances, which if you look at their earnings call, is something to talk about. Is something they're working on to try to unify things. And it's a product that seems like FanDuel or DraftKings does have, but that's it's a very simple thing, but clearly in the tech stack or whatever legal or financial operations is clearly an impediment, which creates that dispersion. And when you look at the statistics on market share, it's a bit insane how DraftKings and FanDuel really are the top two by a significant margin, which as a consumer is not that good. I mean, anecdotally from the friend, it looks like FanDuel odds are persistently fairly bad if you're taking straight bets. Certainly speaking on soccer or football, if you're taking straight bets on FanDuel, I'll say pretty uh, strong trend that other sports books, the smaller sports books, tend to have better odds, right? And that makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, you can think of it as FanDuel being the biggest operator, flexing its largesse and scale, right? To just increase the vig, like increase the spread they're taking. In a previous video, I brought up the Excel where you can look at some of the implied math behind the odds that are being showed. And think about if an event's priced at 1.5 versus 1.48, it's not a big difference, right? If it's $1 bet, 1 times 1.48 gets you 148. 1 times 150 gets you 150. That's 2 cents. But if the real odds, right, if the actual odds, right, should be 151, so the VIG at 150, 151, that's 1 cent versus 148, 151, that's 3 cents, right? And that's a reasonable, you can get you're getting a decent multiple on that, right? And again, as for the consumer, that I don't think that's a good outcome. Although again, I suppose for many consumers, like they don't really care. Right? I think a lot of consumers they don't have a spreadsheet to keep track of odds between sports books or their overall betting history across apps. They don't shop around odds at different sports books. And conceptually, sports betting is already like fundamentally like a negative EV. Now, it's not negative EV in a way that a slot machine is obviously negative EV, but in a sense, right? Because theoretically in sports betting, there is some degree of skill or like omission or commission skill. But conceptually, like you need as much help as you can get. And the simplest thing you can do is just shop around the books to see the difference, because you can oftentimes find pretty meaningful spreads, even if it's just like 0.10, 10 basis points. The basis point is the right word, but if it's but you can find presumably pretty effectively like 1.7 versus 1.8. That's a reason, especially like that's a big difference. Especially I don't know what the it would be interesting statistic like what the average ticket size for a bet is. But if, let's say it's $5, $10, which are probably just given the default bet sizes, pretty common, right? Let's use $10 for the simplicity of math. $10 at 1.7, that's $17. $10 at 1.8 odds. That's 18 bucks, right? That's a dollar, right? Then again, but for the implied risk that you're taking on, and in general, right, like the implied, if you're taking on an odds of 1.7, right, that's implying that that outcome should happen 58 or 59% of the time. 1.8, that implies a 55% outcome of that event, right? And if the outcome is close to a coin flip, just on base odds, like you want to be compensated for that risk, right? Like you want an equity risk premium, and if, in terms of betting, you want and to minimize the vig to the degree that you can, and the way to minimize the vig is to go through the sports books, right? If we go to like a small state like Iowa, or I could pick on Vermont again. It hasn't been interesting that Iowa has so many sports books. Would not have expected that. Presumably Montana does not have a lot. Oh, that's retail, physical location only. North Dakota? No. So New Hampshire, just not pick on Vermont. Okay, let's just say you have just DraftKings, right? Like presumably, right? You live in a market. Again, assuming you're in the majority of Americans, because evidently, right? If there's only three sports books in a market, you are not a significant portion of American consumers, right? Then if you just have the option to shop around, like you should shop around. It's the easiest and most tangible thing you can do. Um, but that's a slight diatribe. But again, right, if you want to look at this, I think it's interesting, right? And of course, right, this is literally the American Gaming Association, so of course they're a bit biased and they like to hype up the prevalence of offshore sports books. Which again, right, if the U.S. is trending towards a legal market of just FanDuel or a Flutter and DraftKings, as for a dominant duopoly and as players exit the market slowly, then at a certain point, the offshore sports books are a competitive balance on the VIGs that those guys can take. Um, so that's that. But again, American Gaming Association, interesting map. Again, it's interesting to see, but and it's just in general, it's a fun thought experiment for when California and Texas will, right? Because Texas, you have Mark Cuban, the Mavericks, and the Adelsons do some what seems like pre-positioning to set up certainly retail sports betting in the future. Whereas California, who knows? It's probably going to be never, just given the ballot initiatives and Native American reservation casino stuff. And then the grand scheme of things, right? Idaho, Utah probably aren't that meaningful of markets. Alaska, Hawaii, probably not that meaningful markets or of markets. Right. So really, the only two skill big markets, probably or three: Minnesota, Texas, California. I'm not fully aware of what the situation is in Minnesota, but again, right, as we can see from the legislation status, right, it's far away. I will say for Texas and California, given their relative, I'm not sure who like the initial leaders would be. But presumably FanDuel and DraftKings, given the amount of spending they could do, will probably just gobble up market share. In the same way they've pretty much done it in all of these other markets, right? Even the local operators, unless it's like Florida, where you've got a monopoly, had a tough time holding on. So that's just another diatribe on the gaming industry. Now back to my friend's predicament, right? So to recap, and as part of this, right, Caesars is certainly a very subscale player. Probably, I think 1 or 2%, 3% market share. Certainly single digits, low single digits at that. And I think deservedly so, right? Like user interface is pretty poor. On the wallet, you have to have separate wallets, I believe. So it's not great. Anyway, so pretty much you have to go to this other state, drive an hour, and also you want to make sure because you want to place the bet on an event which can settle so you can then use the bonus bets, because presumably you don't want to drive to the state, drive back, and have to drive back again a day later to actually use the bonus bets. You would like to do it in one fell swoop, presumably, which led to the predicament of a Labor Day Monday, right? Not in the East Coast early morning, right? Because you want to be traffic, or don't want to be stuck in traffic for such an escapade. But on a Labor Day Monday, there's not too many sporting events that are happening in the morning, right? There's no European or international football, soccer or football. Like the main U.S. sports happen in the afternoon or evening, so you're kind of out of luck. I'm pretty sure. I checked it with the friend as well. I did my own. Let's like double check him and help him out. And it did seem like only tennis was available at these early hours, and like at the 7 a.m. time frame. Only tennis, which led to the wonderful predicament of of my friend having to look through the list of tennis matches, uh, and this match between Walter and Pegosi turned out to be the one that, and again, but it's like the due diligence was A, figuring out how long a tennis match lasts, but then B, I just look at this, what's the spread between the rank, what's the recent performance, what's the surface. Um, so it was a fun time to think a little tennis crash course. It's fun. It's interesting because in tennis, like the odds for this event was 2.2 to 1.7, so it's like 53% on the 1.8 or 1.7, and then like 40% on like the 2.2. So the odds, like it's not a coin flip per se, as there's a relative favorite, but it's not absolute. And then to the degree to which there is a meaningful skill differential between tennis players, like, I'm not qualified enough to say if that exists or not. So it certainly feels like a crapshoot. And again, you think about having to bet $5, which is probably close to what the average bet size is for the average bettor. And that's a reasonable, exhilarating experience. So this one worked out. Pegosi, the Brazilian, held out, as we can see, 1-0, which is great. But that was the story. Pretty much, my friend saw a bet 5 get 50 promotion. Hey, for existing users, right? This isn't like a new user thing. Right? This is for existing users, which for a sportsbook to want to reactivate an existing user, it's not something that most sportsbooks, it's not like ESPN Bet, another subscale player, is trying to do. So for Caesars to do it is interesting. Maybe it says something directionally about the promotional spend for, because Caesars, I believe, wholly owns uh, their gaming operation or a sports betting operation, unlike but MGM's Entain joint venture. Uh, so maybe that says something actually about the marketing spend, or maybe cost of goods sold. I'm not sure where you would put the promotional spend into. Although I suppose promotional spend does have its own unique tax implications for the states. But anyways, that was his little story, right? So pretty much sports betting, interesting market. Just think about it from a market structure, who are the market leaders perspective. And then in terms of my friend, right, he saw bet 5 get 50, his ears perked up. If the market's giving, if that's, it's free money, right? You just have to bet $5 on an event that's above 1.5 odds or above a 60% implied odd. It's almost a shame if you didn't take advantage of that, right? Even if you lose out on the 5, but you get 5 idiosyncratic bets of 10. What hit rate you want to do? 40% on those? If it's 10 bets, $10 per bet, even if it's a bonus bet, you don't get your principal back. Presumably, it's not hard to recoup the 5. So your baseline expected value should be neutral at worst. Again, you could be a bit overconfident, maybe only convert 20%. You want to underwrite to that. But then you just some untapped upside in the 40% or in the remaining 4 bets. Just have one hit on like a 3 odd 4-1 event that will recoup you 6x. Not a bad outcome, right? Of course, I should have Excel sheet help do the math. But anyways, that was the story. So Just wanted to document it for posterity, as I did find it pretty amusing. But again, it is Labor Day weekend, so what else are you gonna do? On a spectrum of things a young male adult should do, being a semi expected value positive better is probably modestly high on the list compared to playing video games or doing drugs or whatever. It will be interesting in a couple years when the last marginal male sports bettor has been converted by all of the marketing spend. It'll be interesting then to see how the sports books target women bettors. Because I read something, and the guy was arguing that the advertising of sports books has changed from 2018 to today. Where in 2018, the sports books emphasize individual skill, like you know more about this sport or this team or these players. Whereas nowadays, it's much more so about like the social or just like the thrill of it, which is interesting. I wish I was older, or more of a marketing background to actually be able to pick the heads and see how directly true that statement is. But I think that makes sense, right? It's only from the connection from daily fantasy, which presumably you have a bit more edge, or thinking, or trying to discover your edge. That makes sense, and it's interesting, right? Like, like what's the implication of the advertising changing from you're smart to do it because it's fun, right? Again, like the I suppose in general that's everything, right? Like the 500th person to get an iPhone is probably not as tech savvy as like the first 200,000 as in tech savviness, and the same probably applies to betting or honestly a lot of financial markets, right? Presumably like the first people to be involved in blockchain crypto stuff are a bit more sophisticated than the people who are buying Bitcoin through Cash App, right? And the same can be said for sports betting, where the people who are doing offshore books or early adopters are more sophisticated than people are just start signing up now. Which is interesting, right? When you think about like consumer lifetime value or like return on investment from the marketing spend from a sportsbook perspective, is an interesting thought experiment. And so again, right? Have an Excel, right? Actually keep track of things. Worst case, you practice Excel. Best case, you get to see a lot of green on do some nice conditional formatting for when you win. And then also, right, just shop around on odds, right? The sports books, you don't owe the sports books anything. They will fleece you and devastate you. There's a reason, right? These sports books are operating in all of these states, right? It's not cheap. It's not free. You have to pay. New Hampshire's a bad example. Virginia, like you have to pay a license fee, right? So it's not free for the sports books, right? They're not operating out of generosity of your heart, right? So if they're gonna give you free money, if they're gonna give you bonus bets, then you should definitely take advantage of it, even if it means driving an hour. And that's what creates an efficient market. At the very least, this will impact Caesar's cost of goods sold or SG&A, hopefully by a slightly negative amount, as hopefully my friend wins some bets, which can hurt or reduce the benefit to Caesar's. But yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good